everyone. My name is Donna Franklin. I'm going to be chairing this session. I can see we've got some of the attendees online. We've got quite a significant number that we're going to join. So we'll just give it 5 minutes, if that's okay, to see who else will join. We'll just give it a couple more minutes and then we'll start, everyone.
Yep.
Hello, everyone. I might get started so that we don't leave it too long and take up, go over time too much. My name is Donna Franklin. I'm the nursing co-chair for the WFPICCS Research Committee. And we're very excited that we can actually present and bring this virtual workshop to you tonight, or tonight for us here in Australia, but for many of you, it might be the morning where you're at. It's a workshop that we have delivered it a couple of years ago, and it's one that was well received, and looking specifically at, how do you start in the research world? What are the tools of the trade that you need to start, and what are some of the hiccups that the obstacles that you hit as you're starting your research career? So I'm not sure if we've got some novices or we've got some experienced people in the audience. So if there's experienced ones, please, throw in your comments as well, which would be greatly appreciated. So just to kick off before we start with the talks, if I can just ensure that everyone stays muted, but I can also see that I'm able to mute you all if there's a problem there, just so that the speakers are heard nice and clear. If you've got any comments that you want to add in, just throw them in the chat section, and we can go to them at the end of each section. And we've got sort of 3 parts to the actual talk, in that we're looking at an ideal research project broken up into components, and then we're going to look at one specific study design and another. So we can have some questions after each of them, or look at the chat and respond to them then. So if I can first just start by introducing our 3 lovely speakers to you tonight. We have, hang on, I know them well, but I just want to pull up their bios. And everything's moved. So Dr. Chisti, we have from Bangladesh. And Dr. Chisti, we've worked with him in quite a few ways with WFPICCS. He is a senior scientist and the head of the emergency department in a research centre in Bangladesh. He's also got an awful lot of experience, particularly in trials that are amongst the Southeast Asia and African countries. So he's got a lot of experience that we can lean on and seek his assistance on, and ask any questions that you may have. Then you've got Dr. Jayashree, and she is from India, and Dr. Jayashree is a professor and head of emergency and the pediatric ICU from the Advanced Pediatric Centre, PGI. Also somebody that's got a lot of experience within respiratory medicine, but also within trials itself. Then you've got Dr. Andreas Schibler. He is from Australia and is a world leader within the pediatric acute respiratory medicine component and children's intensive care. He's got sort of over 30 years experience in academic work, particularly in improving respiratory support methods for children. So between the 3 of them, we have a lot of experience in the room. And please feel free at the end of it to ask any questions. So if I can first hand over to Andreas, who is going to kick off with the ideal research project and the successful delivery, and just asking the right question and the right design and so on. You're muted still.
Yeah, just
Ask to unmute.
okay. Can you hear me?
No, do it again.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. First of all, I want to apologize. I'm living on my couch. I've got an injured foot that has had surgery a few days ago. So if you see the casual background to me, that's the reason why I have to keep my foot up and relax. And the second reason why I want to get your attention, a dear friend of mine just died a few hours ago, and I'm deeply, deeply affected by it. So if I'm not on my best, it's probably the reason why I'm affected by his just death, because I went with him to medical school and have lived my life with him and my experience. Okay, back to where we're going to. So be aware that I'm not going to give a comprehensive talk about all the research possible and research design possible in the universe. I'm going to focus on few things, and people who are willing and would like to have further contact with us, feel free to contact us, because that's in the nature of WFPICCS, that we actually would like to look out and help to help to successful delivery of any research project, no matter what the design is looking like. So what I'm going to talk about is, first of all, it's very important that when you start asking a question, you really need to focus down on the right question. And that's a very simple statement. But asking the right question is so utterly important, and I'm coming back to this as well in defining the primary outcome of your study, because that's linked to the right question, because it's so important if you want your research proposal and study there afterwards being meaningful. And looking at the right outcome is really important because you want to make a difference on how the practice is going on in future. The next question is, it's very important that you ask the right question or choosing the right design in your context. A research question in the US or in Europe or in Australia is not necessarily the same research question that you ask and the design that you ask. So you really need to look at what can we achieve within our context. And that has been emphasized over and over again, that many researchers from well-resourced countries went to less well-resourced countries and implied that, oh, we can ask this question here, we can ask the other question there. And they didn't consider the right context because it may be not even that relevant to your environment. And most importantly is then, if you go down the track to design and write a protocol, that you choose the right design. So these are the relevant questions that we like to answer in this first talk. So first of all, we want to identify the problem, and don't forget, review what others have done. I'm going to talk about this later again, because you're not the first kind of the block of question. There's always someone else who has done a similar work, and go and look for what others have done. And then you set basically your research question in the right context and choose your right design. Once you have decided your design, you can then start to say, okay, how do I collect my data? How do I analyze? And in the end, the painstaking part of it is to write the report or the paper that you want to like to publish. Now, again, I have, when I started my research in, it was in 1987, I have done my first research project, and I thought that I'm the only who knows how to do it and how it should be done. I wish someone would have helped me to say, look, hold on, someone else has done a similar study, and find a similar example and, you know, replicate sort of what others have done. And 30 years ago and now, there's so many studies out there. You're going to find a similar study that has a good impact on outcome and good publication. Just go out there and look what others have done. There's no shame in doing so. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, because we know the methods, we know how to do it, and have a look what others have done and replicate what others have done and use their method as well. There's no shame in doing so. So you don't have to be the inventor of a new design. Now, choosing the right question. It's very important that when you go into your study, you ask your questions first, what you want to achieve. So first of all, if you want to describe a phenomenon, and I'm going to talk about it later, or you want to describe an intervention, drug A, drug B, etc. Or you want to compare drug A versus drug B interventions. Or you want to say, I want to implement a care bundle and show that the improvement in healthcare changes the way that my patients are going. So you really need to say, okay, what is it that I want to ask and answer? So phenomenon, intervention, or comparing intervention, and new care models. There's plenty of them as well, but these are the 4 main items that we need to look at. And the best questions are always, did it improve outcome? Yes and no, a binary question. So it's always hard to have a so-called linear question where you prove that it may improve if you get an improvement by certain percentage and whatever. The best studies are saying if you do A versus B, A has a much better outcome than B by certain p-values. So if you have a question that can be answered by yes and no, that's where you get the merit of your study. Now, describing a phenomenon as I explained it before. So you have an observational study. So let's say we had lots of studies describing the impact of COVID. There were hundreds of studies that showed if you do this or do that and whatever, and it showed an improvement in outcome. Similarly, during COVID, I remember a study from Gattinoni, who said very early in the COVID that you have to early intubate and ventilate patients with COVID. And then everyone was following it. And unfortunately, afterwards, everyone showed that this was actually wrong. So survival and morbidity was a big thing, but it was a description of phenomenon because they didn't randomize, they didn't control the intervention. Then you have always the new challenge, a new drug, a new treatment that you want to test, or you want to implement a new health policy where you show that the cost of the treatment, the cost of the disease or the intervention has reduced in comparison to outcome. And then, of course, for instance, we currently have in Australia and other countries the implementation of the RSV monoclonal antibody or long-acting antibody vaccination for RSV. So there's going to be a lot of studies that are following up where new drugs are going to be implemented and we're going to see are they making a difference in outcome. So these studies are not hard fact studies, but they're describing a phenomenon and they have their merits because who is going to oppose an intervention like the vaccination of RSV if there's good evidence that it may actually reduce the morbidity or mortality even of RSV viruses. So this is important. If you have a phenomenon, you can have a phenomenon like we got the vaccine, we start now and we're going to see it. Or you have a phenomenon that is going to be introduced over time. So that's the deflected line on this graph. And you need to take the time component into consideration. So they're not the same if you start describing a phenomenon, and I'm going to explain it to you as well. So a change over time you need to take into account what are the changes in practice that are influencing as well the outcome. Let's say mechanical ventilation, or the proportion of mechanical ventilation, and nutrition and sedation, and what are we doing with non-invasive ventilation over time? Because over time we got much better with non-invasive ventilation. So I'm showing you here an example of a potentially skewed results, and honestly, it's my own study that I'm criticizing here. We introduced between 2005 and 2009 nasal high flow in bronchiolitis, and you can see between 52 and 90 patients per year were enrolled in the PICU that we surveyed. And you can see in the second row that the proportion of patients allocated to nasal high flow increased from 13% to 66%. And the intubation rate decreased from 37% to 7%. So a huge reduction in intubation rate. But is it really, really true to nasal high flow introduction? I mean, we can argue around it, but you see that the limitation of so-called overtime introduction of intervention and observation over time can cause problems in how you want to interpret the results. Anyway, the easiest way is you're saying at time 0, I have an intervention, I have a before time, I have an after time, and I want to look at how things went. So not like I just spoke before, over time we increased the proportion of patients exposed to nasal high flow. We say, okay, from time 0, all the patients get the new intervention, ideally. But what better is that you say, okay, we say at time 0, we have half of the patients allocated to the intervention, and the other half doesn't go and get the intervention. That's a randomized controlled trial design. And to this date, it's still the gold standard of proof of efficacy of an intervention. Now, as I explained before, it doesn't happen all the time. And even in randomized controlled trials, it doesn't happen all the time. So, for instance, in the RSV vaccination program, you have still a steady incline of patients allocated to the intervention. So you still have the problem that time passes, people do different methods of other interventions, nutrition, invasive, non-invasive, high flow, respiratory support. So it's always a gray zone. And that's where things are getting a little bit muddied. Now, to avoid, or not necessarily avoid that, let's say you have a respiratory bundle where you say, okay, now we give one hospital the best care bundle that we can offer currently. And once you are educated, and it's very important that they're educated, you start using that respiratory bundle. That means, what are you using if someone needs oxygen, if you need high flow, non-invasive ventilation, and invasive ventilation? You describe that in a very comprehensive bundle for children between 0 and 5 years of age. Now, if you put that out to 18 hospitals, for instance, in this case, and you say, all of you are starting it right now, then you will have problems to demonstrate that the before and after effect is impacting or not impacting, if it's a negative trial, on the outcome. So that's where a step-wedged trial design is coming in. And that's quite a beautiful trial design for two reasons. You allocate not the patient as the unit of randomization. You allocate the hospital as a unit of randomization. That means you say hospital 1, 2, 3, and 4 in this graph here. You start in January 24 with the bundle. And the advantage, the secondary advantage, you don't need to randomize patients because the hospital will apply the intervention to all patients that are fulfilling the inclusion criteria similarly. And then 6 or 4 or whatever months you choose, another 4 or 5 hospitals join the team. So every hospital has a control phase prior and an implementation phase post. And that helps you basically to avoid individual patient randomization by allocating a so-called cluster within the study. And the power of this type of study is quite powerful, if I can say so. And you can use the analysis in a very similar way to a randomized controlled trial. And we are using this type of trial design in remote Queensland currently, and we are planning as well to use a similar trial design in Indonesia, because it's very hard to randomize individual patients to a study. And don't forget, I'll come back to me later on in the second talk that I'm going to give around individually randomize the ethical consideration around it. So keep that parked for the moment. Now, most important is your description of the outcome. And I can't emphasize how important it is. The outcome needs to have a solid definition. It needs to be black and white. It's yes and no. Or if you have a binary, a non-binary definition, it needs to have a cutoff that you say, yes, above is positive or below is negative. And go and talk to your colleagues about, is it clinically meaningful? Do I have, if I have a 30%, a 20%, or a 10% reduction, does that change my practice? So you need to ask your colleagues, is this an important outcome, and is the threshold that I'm choosing important to you for your practice? And one of the most important part of it is among your colleagues, you need to have consensus that everyone agrees on the outcome, and that's painful. That takes a lot of discussions. And last but not least, you need to be able to measure it. So it needs to have a number next to it. And once again, it needs to be protected. Protect your primary outcome at all costs. And my research group is absolutely insane and can't hear it anymore, because whenever we have a discussion about changing the protocol and can we do it this way or this way or this way, I always say to them, okay, let's have a discussion, but we need to make sure that the primary outcome is not changed by the primary outcome. Now, the next step is consider your context. So I'm talking about Australia and New Zealand, where we have done research, and this is completely different where you live. Talk to your collaborators because they know what they want to have answer to. And inform of your intention. Research doesn't happen by dictating. Make sure you inform your colleagues. And to me, the most important part of whatever I've done over the last 30 years, I made friends. I actually went for every single study that we have done in the past. We visited the sites, we talked to them and listened to the concerns they have. And listen and listen, and you know, if you don't take their concerns seriously, you're not going to be successful. And if you don't tap into the local resources, you're not going to find people who are vested in the interest. So avoid helicopter research where you go and say, you do this and I tell you what to do. That's not going to work. Important as well is that the people locally get involved in the data collection, that they actually are accountable for the quality of the data. And to me, one of the most important parts is making sure that your data collection is safe and secure. We're using RedCap as one of our main databases. I just can encourage you to sign up to RedCap because it's a fabulous tool to use. Now, the next step is very important in the protocol writing. The protocol, the protocol is the main stem of your study. It is so important that you are working almost half of your time you're performing your research in the protocol writing, because if you don't get the protocol right, you're going wrong. And be realistic in your goals, what you want to achieve. And in the protocol writing, try to get really some auditing data. So try to understand what is really happening on the ground and measure the potential outcome. Do some auditing before. And if you do an audit in a pilot study, ask the question, can I answer that in a study? Can I write a protocol and get it approved? And can I lead it to a research study? Most important, reach out to experts. And that's where WFPICCS is actually engaging into more initiatives now. We have we are establishing a mentoring program. So reach out to someone who's done the work before, who's done the mistakes before, and reach out to a statistician. Without statistician, you're not going to be successful in your research. And if you do implementation science, ask as implementation scientists. And to be honest, for young researchers, don't be shy to send an email and say, can you help me, to a mentor, and find some answers to it. So in the end, focus on your aims and objectives. Identify the research methods that are suitable for your research problems in your context, and find why and rationalize why you're selecting the particular research methods for your context. And think about who you want to relate the question to. Research questions in lower and middle income countries are not necessarily important for high income countries, but you want to tell your colleagues in the same situations, what have I done and what can I provide you with an answer to improve outcome of your patients? And don't be shy of analyze your data as well in very different methods and look at it. But I'm going to talk to you later on again how a research project should be set up. Make your mind up right from the beginning how you want to report and describe your data. And there's always a possibility after you've done your study that you say, oh, we didn't get that right. But what about the question here and there? And let's do a secondary analysis. Let's do another look at your data. So analyze data in different techniques dependent on, oh, I didn't think about that, or this is a new outcome that I didn't think of it. That's okay. You can do secondary analysis. Okay, thank you very much. I think I'll leave up to Donna for the next talk. Yep.
Thanks, Andreas. Can you just I'll just mute you. Can you just unshare? I might get in interest of time, we might just race along to Dr. Chisti. If you can start your talk and share the screen for resources and the funding availability and looking at how to achieve your sample size. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Share one by one. Share.
There you go. We can see it, Chisti.
Okay, sorry, just
Can't hear you though. You're still muted.
yeah, I'm just sharing stuff. Just a second, please.
No.
Do you hear me now?
Still can't hear you. No. No, unmute you.
So do you hear me now?
No, still can't hear.
What happened?
No.
Yeah, I can hear you, Chisti.
I can hear.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're audible.
Okay, what if I
Yeah.
say withdraw co-host permission? There, try that. No?
Okay. Just a second. Okay.
Gosh, no, can't. Ask to unmute. There we go. Did you get a message come through? No, we still can't hear you.
Now
Oh,
you're muted.
And
ask
now
to unmute.
Yeah, now you're okay. You are okay now. Unmute yourself, Chisti.
I
Yeah,
am talking.
Thanks, Janet.
It
We
is
can't-
automatically
Oh, can you
muted.
hear him? Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, I can share my screen. Okay. Okay, my presentation. Do you see my slides?
yes.
Okay.
Put it on
Okay.
slideshow, Chisti.
Yeah. Is it okay now?
Yeah, okay. You go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. As we have already very meticulously listened the talk of Andreas, who actually pointed out how to the high quality research. So I just wanted to take 5 minutes to have a glimpse how we can provide the resource or allocate the resource and funding availability. As you know that those who are the preliminary researchers and those who are experienced, I trust that all of you know this. Just it is the refresher. So resources of the clinical research includes itself the availability of funding as well as institutional support that includes the physicians as well as researchers like scientists and nurses and health workers. And we need to have the evidence-based resources that includes actually evidence of effectiveness, feasibility, sustainability, and simultaneously transferability. And if we see the types of the evidence-based resources, it used to be systematic reviews and non-systematic reviews. And all of you know that the systematic reviews incline mainly on the focuses on a particular issue, narrowing down the topic in a public health importance area. That might be what I can just say. It might be important for a setting like Bangladesh or India, but might not be important in New Zealand or Australia. However, we need to have all the available evidences globally, and that needs to be included in the systematic review, and all should be come under the pooled analysis to understand generate the real evidence from the systematic reviews. However, from the non-systematic review, it does not include all the evidences available globally. It might include the important evidences, and that might also depend on the choice of the investigators or the authors. And in evidence-based research, those are classified as the non-systematic reviews used to published by the federal government in the peer-reviewed journal. And if you see the hierarchy and for the evidence-based resources of the clinical research, you can find that there are at least 4 tiers. In tier 1, that you can see here, that all the initial recommended points, if we have the research question, we need to go for the tier 1 initially to find out where we can find the answer of the question, which includes the most comprehensive systematic reviews of medical or scientific literature. These include all of this. However, if we don't find the answer by evaluating all of those, we can go to the tier 2 box, where you can find that other more credible resources, which it includes different guidelines and also micro index materials. However, generally we don't find, practically we used to see that we don't find all the answers if it is the gray area, especially for the settings where here's the public health importance. We used to go for the tier 4. Before going to the tier 4, we also used to see the tier 3, which includes mainly textbooks and yearbooks. And in the tier 4, we used to see the most comprehensive searching unfiltered database like PubMed, Embase, Sinhal, and other standard medical indexes. And what practically we used to see that if we don't get the answer of a gray area, then we try to amalgam all of these 4 tiers literatures in the introduction. That these are the points that we searched, and we think that these are the gray areas that we need to address. If we don't address those gray areas, these are the things that might happen in future. That does mean there might have consequences, and on the basis of that, we might to have the writing of the protocol with into the research question that Dr. Andres has already pointed out. And for the resources, research funding is an integral part to run a research, and we need to apply for the grant and securing research funding, and for that, you know that for the initial type of researcher that in the developing country researchers used to do for the chart analysis or for the research that used to be done by to improve the quality of care by doing the audit. This kind of researchers might not require on funding, and it can be done with only institutional support. However, the multi-country studies or any studies that required sample size from the external support that I wanted to mean that those needs larger sample and a gray area that is not the gray area of an institutional alone. It is a gray area of a country or more than one country. Then we need to have the multi-country trial or multi-site research which needs actually funding. And if we need to have the funding, we need to compete for the funding. And if you see the pyramid of the funding sources, there are at least 4 slices, at least 10 slices, and each representing a type of money that we want. And if you see the lowest one, which used to be done by quick loaners, which is very easy, but we don't usually those who are the researchers perform institutional research. They don't go for the quick loaners, but they used to apply for the institutional equity. However, if we want to have a very successful applicant for the grant award, we have to exercise the lowest slices and go very slowly to the upper slices. However, to perform the multi-country style or randomized style, we must have to apply for the institutional funding, and that has a high chance to fail. But failure is the pillar of the success, and because those who used to perform research for the last 20 years, we have found that a single application might not be successful in a single time. But if we can apply to make our application more robust, then it can be successful. And Professor Andreas already shown that how we can make the successful application that needs to have a lot of structures that and my presentation doesn't have scope to show this. So I am sure that Professor Andres will show how we can make the successful funding each applicant in his next presentation. So last but not the least, in the research funding is an essential part of the conducting research, and to be able to secure a research grant. It is not only a matter of achievement with the gratification of a researcher, but it also helps the advancement of the career. And for that, we need to be patient. If we can do not get funding from a single application, then we have to make our application more robust according to the reviewers' recommendation. Thank you. I will go to the next presentation after stopping sharing. If you had any questions, stop me here, or otherwise I will go to the next presentation.
Well, Chisti, while you're just going to the next one, Andreas has just put in the chat, what about when you're seeking funding or to seek funding with some meaningful grants with the collaborative work with good mentors that might increase their opportunities?
Yeah, I completely agree that before that, I again want to emphasize that what Professor Andreas says, that before applying for the funding, we have to have a very meaningful protocol. For the protocol writing, we need to involve not only as a single researchers like me, we also need to involve statistician. If it is the implementation research, we need to involve the implementation scientist. And certainly, even I am a very senior researcher, I still think that I need to have to involve other senior researchers to be a more successful grant. And I completely agree that we might have a multi-country collaborative research to have a successful grant, but it is not the only criteria. Main criteria is that we have to have a very meaningful research question, which has high public health importance in a particular area. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll let you go on to your next one.
Okay. Oh no, sorry. I have to find out what presentation is. Okay. So, I'm sorry, please allow me some time. Okay, sorry, just I've taken some time. Do you see the presentation now?
Yes, we can see it. Thanks, Chisti.
Okay. So as the sample size is very important to actually answer the research question, so we have to have a very proficient sample size. So sample size used to denote the number of individuals included in a research study. This actually mainly to represent a population because an entire population might not be included in a study. And it also the total number of the respondents included in the study. And it needs to be representative of an entire population. Even it needs to stratification by age, gender, and location, and also to ethnicity. And the population size is the entire group that we want to draw conclusion. And if the population that a sample is selected, we used to use the probability of the non-probability samples. And for that, we need for a close estimate, especially when dealing with a relatively small or easy measure group of people. And for the calculation of the sample size, which is very imperative part of a protocol, we need to have the population size, if known at all. However, we need to have a very precise confidence interval as well as confidence level, and also standard deviation. And we need to give one example for that. And for the calculation of the sample size, what I have shown in a previous slide for the confidence level, that confidence level need to have a line with the Z-score, and there is a conversion of the confidence level of the Z-score for the calculation of the sample size. We don't need to memorize this, just we need to know this. And for that, I have given an example how to calculate the sample size just for an observational study and mainly descriptive study. And by knowing the confidence interval as well as confidence level with type 1 error. And here it has been shown that if we used to take the 95% confidence interval with the 5% standard deviation, that called type 1 error. And for that, you know that for the 95% confidence level, our Z-score is 1.96. And using this formula, we can calculate the sample size very easily. So for case control study and for interventional study, especially from the randomized control trial, there are other formulas that we can use if we we need to also know the Z-score for that. And for the essential steps to achieving sample size, we must have to have a study plan where we need to have the primary outcome. And in most of the times, sample size depends on the primary outcome. And simultaneously, we need to specify the parameters with the significant levels and standard error, and also the dispersion. And we need to have the effect size, especially to calculate the sample size of an interventional trial. And simultaneously, we need to explore uncertainty by keeping the opportunity of sensitivity analysis and for the alternative designs. And why sample size is so important, we need to have a very precise calculation of the sample size on the basis of the previous evidence. And if the sample size is so small, we might get false positive results, or even get false negative results. That does mean that in case of small sample size, we might miss and get integrate opportunity to answer a real question. and simultaneously, if in some cases, we might get some statistical difference with smaller sample size. However, if we get the adequate sample size, that difference might not be attained eventually. So a sample size should not be too small. Each event should not be too large, because in case of too large sample size, in most of cases, we might get some difference which might not really achievable in a robust sample size. So we have to have that calculation always, as well as too large sample size is the waste of money that should also be kept in consideration. And challenges to achieve the sample size in time, or those who we performed a number of researches, we know that although we during the protocol writing, the way we used to presume, or the data that we have, it might not be applicable after 1 or 2 years. By this time, we might not get that kind of patient. This might this might influence the slow patient enrollment, as well as there might have the impact of seasonality. And I can give you just one example, as I used to work in diarrheal hospital, where we used to find that if we want to perform a research on rotavirus diarrhea during this season, now it is the hot season, we might not find adequate number of patients with rotavirus diarrhea. It used to find, which it is used to be found in the winter season. So this is one of the impact of the seasonality that we used to find always. And we also see that initially we might think that that sample size can be attained from a single site. And if we see the site that we have selected, it is not, we are not getting adequate patient, then we have to change the, we have to include the number of sites, increase the number of sites. And sometimes which might happen is that the trained staff, which we might lose due to the rapid turnover of the study, especially in government hospitals. Those who are the trainee doctors, they used to have the rapid turnover from one hospital to another hospital, and nurses also like this. So we have to keep in mind, in that case, we need to have the refresher training after quick succession. And also we need to have the coordination of the budget with the sample size. And sometimes we might have large sample size, but simultaneously we don't have that adequate amount of budget to attain that sample size, and it might hamper the study. And if we can miscalculate the manpower to attain attain the sample size, that might also hamper the study in future. And certainly the adequacy of the funding is one of the most important driver to have the sample size in time. And in a nutshell, we can tell that we cannot ignore the sample size calculation. Sometimes we used to do this paper, especially in case of chart analysis research, as well as audit type of research. However, those are very low quality evidence. So for the very high quality evidence, we have to have a very precise sample size calculation. And what we have already told, the small sample size increases the chance of significant difference as false positive. And small sample size also increase the chance that important differences will be missed. And we must think about sample size and planning a study. It should not be kept in the lower stage of our thinking. Now, thank you very much for your patient sharing. If you have any query and questions, please ask me. And after 1 hour, I will have another presentation on how we can do observations in research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chisti. Given that just in the interest of time, we might go forward with Jayashree's talk, which is looking at the challenges to this having an ideal project and how to improvise to overcome these obstacles. I'll pass it over to you, Jayashree.
Yeah. So is my screen visible and am I audible?
Yeah, yes to both.
You're loudly audible. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Donna, and thanks WFPICCS for this opportunity. So I would be briefly taking you through the ethical considerations when we plan a research trial or a research project. So ethical decisions, as we all know, are based on 4 principles. What we say as beneficence, that is do good, non-maleficence, that is do no harm, parental autonomy, that is freedom of informed choice, where we talk about the informed consent, and justice, where there has to be a fair and equal distribution. So these are the 4 tenets on the basis of which ethics, whether it's in terms of clinical medicine or whether in terms of research, usually rests on. Also, there is a concept of what we call as a good clinical practice. These are nothing but standard guidelines which have been laid down for clinical trials with respect to the design of the study, the conduct of the study, the performance and monitoring, the auditing, recording, and analysis, and finally, the reporting of the results. And why do we do this? The objectives are to protect the rights, dignity, and well-being of subjects participating in clinical trials. I think this is one of the most important concepts when we talk about ethics in research, to ensure the scientific validity and credibility of the data which is collected in these clinical trials. This again is a very important aspect. And it has to be economical, cost effective, whatever resources we use, whether it's human resources, animal studies, or material resources, it has to be more economical. And finally, to ensure that the universal ethical values and international scientific standards are followed across the board. So the good clinical principles generally rests on several facets. Important among them are a requirement of a good institutional review board or an institutional ethics committee. There would be responsibilities pinned on different stakeholders, for example, the sponsors, the clinical investigator, or what we call as the principal or the primary investigator. There should be a very good clinical trial protocol, which has already been emphasized in the first talk by Andreas. There has to be an investigator's brochure, and of course, there'll be several essential documents which are required. And all this is very important when we talk about ethics in a particular clinical trial. So I'm going to briefly divide the ethical consideration at different stages in the conduct of a trial. First is the planning, the second is the conduct, and of course, the third or the final stage is the reporting or publication of the study results. So planning, I think there has to be a lot of thought and thinking that has to go at this particular stage. It's very important that we discuss with all stakeholders, we discuss the pros and cons before we put the protocol to the paper. So before a trial is initiated, all the risks, the inconveniences should be weighed against the anticipated benefit, not only for the participants, the subjects, but also for the society at large. Very often we have ambitious research questions which may not finally benefit the clinical subjects or maybe the society at large. So it's very important that we don't only focus on our patients, but also the society at large. And a trial should be initiated and continued only if we feel in the discussions and the consensus that the anticipated benefits are going to justify the risk that might be involved in this particular trial. As I said, the right, safety, and well-being of the trial subjects is paramount and probably the most important consideration when we talk about research. And it's very important for the stakeholders or the clinicians who are going to perform the trial or the research project to first have a good information about what background knowledge already exists, whether it's about an investigational product, whether it's about a trial or an intervention in ICU, before we say that this is the research question that we are interested or we are keen to ask. And as has been emphasized, and it's, I mean, the more said, it is better, that the trial should have a scientifically sound and described very clearly a detailed protocol, because finally we have to comply by the protocol which has been laid down. And in the planning process, when we ask research question, we all know that research questions, there are several ways. So one is the PICCS, where we look at the population, the intervention, the comparator, and the outcome. I'm not going to go into the details, but it's very important that we fit in whatever we plan to do our research question, we split it into these 4 components, and finally refine it under the finer criteria, which takes care of the feasibility. We may have a research question, but we find that it's not feasible at all. A particular drug which we may want to test is not available freely in a given setup. So the drug accessibility, availability, the number of sample size that we are going to get, is there an expertise? Are we having funds to kind of support this particular research question and protocol? So feasibility is a very important part. The research question has to be interesting. It has to be novel. I think in the first lecture, it was said that we should not just reinvent the wheel. There has to be some fresh insights that we need to provide. And our aim is to identify the knowledge gap, and our research question should go on to answer and fill this particular knowledge gap. It has to be ethical. This goes without saying. In terms of safety, there has to be a good informed consent and data confidentiality and privacy. And most importantly, whatever question we ask and we set out to answer has to be very relevant for the setup in which we work. So it has to be very local, it has to be contemporary, and it has to be temporal. Only then it can influence our clinical practice and probably become a part of certain policy documents. So even asking a research question in a particular format and finally refining it under the finer concept is also having a lot of ethical ramifications. So ethics just does not stop at protecting the data confidentiality or the participant safety, but even the way you ask the research question, the way you spend money, the way you utilize the funds that come for the particular project, all finally converge on to the ethical aspects or ethical consideration of a clinical trial. So after planning comes the actual conduct of the trial. So that involves several stakeholders, which starts from the study sponsors. There would be site personnel, which are the investigators, the co-investigators, and several people who, the research coordinators, and there may be many site personnel. There will be an approval body in every institute where a trial is conducted, which is routinely called as the Institutional Review Board. There could be an additional approval authority in the form of what we call as the DSMB, or the Data Safety Monitoring Board, the study subjects, of course, and several regulators. So the conduct of the trial has several stakeholders, and there are several ethical considerations to each of these stakeholders. So clinical trials, as I have already said, should be conducted in accordance with the ethical principles which have been outlined in the Declaration of Helsinki. So whenever we put our protocols on pen and paper, we generally talk about that the trial or the ethical justification in a given trial conforms to the Declaration of Helsinki, and of course the good clinical practice guidelines. The trial should be conducted in compliance with the protocol that has been submitted to the IRB and has been approved by the IRB. If there are any modifications or amendments to this protocol, then it is important from ethical point of view to resubmit the protocol for the amendments and then get a fresh approval from the IRB and then go ahead with the conduct of the trial. Each individual involved in the trial conduct should preferably go through the good clinical practice certification. They should be qualified by education, training, and experience in conduct of clinical trials. All information should be well recorded, handled, and stored in a way that it allows for accurate reporting, verification, and interpretation. And there must be systems in place and procedures in place which assure that the quality of every aspect of the trial is monitored repeatedly, audited repeatedly, and should be implemented with strict adherence to and strict compliance to the protocol, the clinical trial protocol. Then comes the responsibility of the sponsors. Of course, the sponsors are involved right from the trial design, The investigator always works in close coordination with the sponsor. There should be safety reporting. So adverse events should be reported to a data safety monitoring board or to the IRB. There has to be regular monitoring and audit because this is very important with respect to the ethical principles. And there has to be all approvals have to be sought before the trial conduct starts within a particular institution or multicentric institutions. The investigator has several responsibilities. Many of them have a lot of ethical ramifications. Of course, the primary investigator is responsible for seeking all approvals from all important approval bodies. The protocol compliance has to be 100%. If there is any problems in protocol adherence, that has to be transparently put down. The trial conduct has to be transparent. The records have to be maintained. Reports have to be sent from time to time to the reporting authorities. The staff has to be monitored. And it is very important that medical care, whether it's related to the trial or whether it's non-related to the trial, has to be standardized and continued both for trial participants as well as for other patients. Study subjects are a very important component of any project, research project or clinical trial. So it's very disclosure and consent are probably two important things that as investigators and as stakeholders, it is important for us to kind of talk to the parents or to the patients if they are within that particular age group. So a patient information sheet, which is elaborate, should be given to all the subjects during recruitment. That should have details of the objectives of why we are planning to do this study, what is the background knowledge, what kind of knowledge gap is this, and why we have decided or zeroed on to this particular research question. What is the procedure or the intervention that we are going to do, and what are the potential risks and benefits? Both need to be highlighted in the patient information sheet. The patient has a right to refuse participation. After reading, the parents can read through the parent information sheet and they have the right to refuse participation of their child. The informed consent should be freely given without any coercion and should be obtained from every subject prior to trial participation. And the consent have to be explained to the patients or the guardians in their perspective. The confidentiality of the record should be maintained. The identification of the subjects have to be it has to be protected. It has to be anonymized, and the privacy and confidentiality rules in accordance with the applicable regulatory requirements have to be followed. And as I said in my previous slide, the medical care which is given to and the medical decisions which are made on behalf of the subjects should always be responsibility of a qualified physician. There are several important elements when it comes to an informed consent. It is voluntary. This is very, very important. It's a voluntary participation. The duration of the trial has to be specified. Risk versus benefit ratio has to be outlined clearly. There should be a clause on the insurance and compensation in case, unfortunately, there is a trial-related adverse effect. Rights and confidentiality has to be protected. And it should also outline the name of the contact person in case the patient feels that or the parent feels that they need to contact the ethics or the concerned person. So the important aspects for a primary investigator or a principal investigator is to discuss with the parents or the patients in their language, the language which they understand. So the informed consent has to be in several vernacular languages. English may not be the only language that is understood by patients, especially in low middle income countries. So it's very important that the PI makes all these participation information sheet as well as the informed consent in the local language, translated into local language, sit with them, explain to them what is written there. Sometimes certain participants may ask this explanation to be given to their legal representative before the trial begins. And the PI needs to give potential and the participant ample time and opportunity to ask questions about the trial and discuss it with their relatives and family members before they go ahead with a yes. In some places, the consent process is video recorded, and these are maintained as folders in the trial folders. And if the potential participation decides to get involved in the trial, then he or she provides voluntary consent by signing and dating the written informed consent document, which has to be countersigned by the PI and also by a witness and a copy of the same has to be given to the participant. And as said before, the participant has a right to withdraw consent at any time without any repercussions. They need not give any reason, and there will be no penalty on the participants for withdrawing from the trial at any point in time. The IRB has has a very important role to play, the Institute IRB, because they have to safeguard the right, safety, and well-being of all subjects. They have to review the clinical trial protocol for all its ethical ramifications. And this has to be done within a reasonable time so that there is no delay in starting of the project. The review proposed research at convened meetings and the review has to continue what we call as trial monitoring, which has to be an ongoing process. The risks of subject has to be minimized with respect to the benefits. So these are what the IRB would see, that the risks to the subjects are minimal, the benefits are more, the subject selection is equitable. So that is the fourth component of the ethical principles or the tenets. That is, it has to be equitable and fair and uniform for all. We have the IRB would look at the provision for monitoring of the data and also look at privacy and confidentiality clause. If there are any unanticipated problems, let's say there is an adverse effect or a serious adverse effect or a mild adverse effect, it is the responsibility of the primary investigator as well as the sponsor to inform or report to the IRB, which will again convene, look at the event, and then take a call as to whether this event was related to the intervention or whether it was related to otherwise. In some projects, intervention trials, there is a data safety monitoring board which watches from above. It's an independent group of experts that is separate from the IRB, but the independent group of experts would discuss the adverse effects and then advise the IRB regarding what they feel about a particular event. So they will review the accumulating data from the clinical trial over a specified interval. So generally clinical trials, they convene a data safety monitoring board at 50% enrollment. Some convene it at 25% enrollment. So depending on what the trial investigators want. So it is the responsibility of the DSMB to give its report to the IRB, and then together they take a call about what has to be done for a particular adverse event. So the regulatory authorities review has to go through a particular algorithmic process. And finally, there would be approval, rejection of clinical trial at the first phase, or if a particular event is related to the trial or otherwise. After the planning as well as the conduct of the trial, there are several ethics involved in publication. So most important again is the confidentiality clause, the reporting steps taken during cleaning, sorting, and analyzing of data. This is important. It's important for all investigators to report negative findings also. It doesn't mean that only if it is positive, it needs to be reported. Not reporting negative findings is not fully ethically transparent. Always acknowledge the source, avoid duplicate publication of the same research in different journals or in different languages. So this is more like a redundant publication. So authorship, there are certain ethical principles involved during reporting, especially with respect to authorship. So it depends on the contribution, the responsibility, as well as the approval. And it's a good idea when the trial is being designed and planned and is being written up and edited and re-edited, it's important at that time itself during the conceptualization stage that the authorship and other things are decided. Conflict of interest is a very important component. Relevant interest should be discussed in the early stage of research. The researchers need to ensure that their conflicts of interest do not influence the methodology and outcomes of research. This is very, very important, especially with respect to funding and sponsors too, that their conflicts of interest should not influence the methodology and outcomes of research. We should consult an independent researcher or ethics committee if there is an ambiguity or if there is a doubt about the conflicts of interest. And when publishing, these conflicts of interest should be declared and it should be transparent and should be told to the editors. So as I said, plagiarism and redundant publication are two important things when we report a trial, and it's important that these things need to be kept in mind. Just touching upon certain barriers to an ideal research project. Again, the barriers can occur at these three stages. It can occur at the stage of planning, especially when you have an inappropriate research question. It's very weak, or it may not be relevant. It may not be local. It's something which is too ambitious and that it's impossible for you to get that kind of sample size or funding to answer that research question. So they can be, the inappropriate research question itself can become a barrier to a research project. Irrelevant endpoints or outcomes, the risk may be more as compared to benefit. When we are conducting trials, the barriers could be that maybe we have just taken a convenient ethical clearance, whereas it required a more rigorous ethical clearance. There is inadequate enrollment. I will just touch upon this in a while in the next slide. Again, as I spoke about the conflict of interest, funding, and data analysis and privacy. And of course, certain barriers during the publication stage. Now, the barriers to enrollment, this happens often in low middle income countries. There may be mistrust of the research method and researchers. The patients feel that they are being used as some kind of, something like they are being experimented. So that's the kind of mistrust that gets onto the patients. So sometimes they refuse to give consent. The lack of physician caregiver awareness about trials, problems in clear communication, the method in which the informed consent has been presented to the parents or the patients, diversity in cultural and ethnic backgrounds. They have different values and beliefs that may prevent them from giving consent for being a part of a trial. Language literacy barriers, again, an important problem in low middle income countries. Sometimes community-based research versus institution-based research. Institution-based research, it is sometimes easier to get consent as compared to community-based research. And there can be a long-standing fear, apprehension, and skepticism among physicians, among patients, and these may become barriers to enrollment. Researchers and clinicians themselves can have certain apprehensions because of which it becomes a barrier. There may be lack of awareness of appropriate clinical trials. The researcher may not be always aware of the available clinical trials in the local resources. They assume that none would be appropriate for their patients. There is an unwillingness to lose control of a person's care. So very often the doctors feel that no, by enrolling a patient under a particular trial, they may lose control over the patient's care. So relationship with patients is very important for certain physicians, and doctors fear that once the patient gets enrolled in a trial, the doctors may lose the control over their patient. Many physicians believe that standard therapy is the best. Why do we want to experiment? Why do we want to test new therapies? And many feel that this adds on to the administrative burden, especially when we don't have research protected time. These are some of the things, clinical plus administrative. So doing research actually becomes more burdensome. And cost, of course, again, in low middle income countries, I think Chishti has touched upon this. Cost barriers are huge because funding doesn't come easily. So many of the funding agencies, sponsors, physicians, as well as trial participants often fear that the insurance company will not cover their participation. And therefore, those who are uninsured, they always have, doubts about whether they should participate in the trial or not. So several things which are linked to cost and cost effectiveness become barriers in the conduct of trials. So to summarize, when we look at ethics and the barriers, ethics is a key component in research to protect the rights, dignity, as well as the well-being of participants. And more importantly, to ensure scientific validity and credibility of the data. This is very important. We spend so much money, we spend so much time, we enroll so much subjects, but what comes out in the end has to be valid and credible. Different stages of a trial pose different challenges. And it's important that as investigators, we comply with the GCP guidelines during planning, conduct, and reporting stages, and follow all ethical principles. And frequent review, audit by approving authorities assures quality the way the trials are conducted. So thank you very much for this opportunity. We hope to see many of you join us at Cancun, Mexico for the 12th World Congress of Pediatric Intensive and Critical Care Society. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'll just stop sharing the screen and then.
Thanks so much, Jayashri. That was great.
I hope I maintain time.
Yes, no, you're fine. We're a little bit over, but I think it's just a joint group. So we might just forward on to the next component, which we're going to talk about. Andreas is going to talk to you about study designs, interventional ones, and the pros and cons between 3 different versions. And then Chisti is going to talk to observational study design and have the right way to do it and the not so right way to do it. So I'll pass it over to Andreas. Mute.
Okay, thanks. Listening to the last 2 talks, I really think that if we encompass the lower income and middle income countries, these countries experience the highest rate of mortality for infants and children. And I think we should make out of this a voice, like the climate change voice, which impacts again on the same countries, that we need to inform the higher income countries on how we can demonstrate that within these countries we can improve outcome. And convince these countries of higher income, we need to have designs for interventional trials that are as robust as they would accept to be true. And that's where I'm coming from, that I think we need to implement and use basically the weapons of higher income countries to make an argument for lower income countries. Hold on, if you do this, it makes a difference, and it is going to make a difference. So first of all, if we plan to do an investigation, do we assign the exposure? So we say we're doing an experimental study or observational. And experimental study means that we say we have a group that gets the intervention and a group that doesn't get the intervention. So non-randomized versus randomized. And observational is, okay, who is the comparison group? Yes, okay, we have got a comparison group. No, we don't have a comparison group. And if you have a comparison group, we do an analytical study where we use the direction. So that means, I'm showing that in the next slide, where we place the observational study in a cohort study, case control study, or cross-sectional study. So a cohort study says, okay, we have an exposure, we change the way we do things, and we look at the outcome. So we have a time period where things are changing, and we have to decide after 1 or 2 or 3 years, we measure the outcome, have things improved. Or a case control study is that we place an intervention into a study and we look at what happened in the past and what happened in the future. So we have an exposure in the past and we have an outcome in the future, and we compare the two. And the cross-sectional is basically we have an exposure and outcome intersected with each other over time. And, you know, these studies are always flawed of, do we outperform basically, or do we just measure the improvement of the healthcare system? Sometimes interventional or cohort studies are just showing that we just got better in mechanical ventilation, we just got better in non-invasive ventilation. And is it really this intervention that made the difference? So they are good, but they're not hard fact. Okay, now if we do intervention studies, we have to always look at and keep this slide and copy it and look at it later when you do your study. It's quite a difficult slide to understand, but I'm trying to get you through. So is the numerator included in the denominator? That means yes or no. If it's included in the denominator, it is telling you a different outcome measure. If it is included, if you say yes, it's a rate, or an example, it's the incidence rate. So that means how many patients out of a total population have fulfilled a certain criteria. And then you say, okay, 10 out of 20 have fulfilled that rate. if it's not included in the denominator, then you have a proportion and you get a prevalence rate. I mean, it is an epidemiological phenomenon, but you really need to use the right descriptors of what you're going to do. Or if it's not included in the denominator, you have a ratio. So the maternal mortality ratio, for instance. And if you go into the studies, what is the best study we can do? It's a randomized controlled trial. It's a randomized double-blinded controlled trial that the investigator and the patient doesn't know what they received as an intervention, and that's so-called the best evidence. And then we downgrade the evidence. And if you plan a study, because you always, you quite commonly can't do a randomized double-blind controlled trial because the intervention that you do is obviously blatant. You can say, I can't blind the face mask on the face of my patient. I can't blind the intubation. I can't blind this and that. So it's not always possible to do a double-blind controlled trial. So you're going down the track of, yes, okay, the evidence is less well rated, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your study is going to be less important in the end because you say, I can't do it. I can't do a double-blind controlled trial because it's evident I can't do it. So you have to rationalize and say, I can't do it. Okay, let's go in randomized controlled trials because that's the gold standard. As I said, double-blinded randomized controlled trial. The investigator doesn't know what the patient receives, and the patient doesn't know what they receive, and that's probably the gold standard. Mind you, I will show you later on, it may be not the absolute gold standard. Or you say, okay, I do a randomized control trial where I know what the control got and what the intervention got, but I know how they look differently. Now, before you go in a randomized controlled trial, you have to go and talk to your colleagues and say, if I gave intervention A or if I gave intervention B, are you happy for your patients to be randomized to A and B? If they don't agree to allocate their patients to the same, you're going to have missed patients because the clinicians are naughty. They're going to say, oh, I couldn't randomize because I don't know. And then they do their own things. So you need to really discuss, are both interventions accepted amongst your clinicians if they are accepted as equal? And then there's a big questions around consent. You know, you quite often have in intensive care not time to explain to parents, oh, we would like to do this, or we would like to do this. And do you agree either? Think about it. And you don't have the time because an endotracheal tube needs to go in. So think about delayed consent that is quite now coming more and more acceptable, that you consent patients after the fact. It's actually not a consent. It is a consent to continue, that you tell the parents, look, sorry, we randomized your child to a trial and we ask you afterwards, are you happy to continue the data collection? But you didn't have the option actually to agree. It is a very topical discussion at the moment. So for whoever wants to have a discussion around it, I've just completed 3 trials, a big randomized control trial around the topic, and gained some insight. I'm happy to respond to any of these questions. And now, very important, many of you guys are familiar with the COAST trial. That was the oxygen therapy trial in hypoxemic children in Africa, performed by Kath Maitland. And there was sort of a randomization of children who were hypoxemic. And I show this in this flow diagram. So this was the hypoxemic stratum. That were children between 80 and 92% of oxygen saturation on presentation. And those children received either high flow, low flow oxygen, or nothing. And this trial was abandoned because clinicians said, how can you not offer oxygen to children who are hypoxemic whilst you're having an oxygen cylinder in the same room? And I'm not answering the question. I'm just asking the question, how do we answer the ethical question? If it were my child, I would know what I would respond to the research team, having a child with a saturation of 82 or 80. But we need to really, really ask, what are we doing with research questions in less well-resourced countries? And are we applying just a helicopter research paradigm, or are we actually asking what you guys within these environments are thinking is the best for our own children? Now, if you do a randomized controlled trial, you need to think about your so-called consort diagram, which is saying, okay, who do we allocate, who we don't allocate, who received the intervention, who didn't receive the intervention, and who did we lose to follow-up? And that's a very, very important question when you plan a trial, because when you assess for eligibility and you all of a sudden realize that we exclude a quite substantial proportion of the patient, it becomes a problem of, is this representative? Is this really the population that we are interested in? I just show you an example of the JAMA. The JAMA shows you how to use a consort statement, who you assess for eligibility, who do you exclude, who do you randomize, and who do you lose to randomization afterwards. I'm just showing a known example of our own study. You know, we had 23,862 children in assessed, and we had 22,295 excluded. But we had 1,348 patients excluded because they were not approached to consent. They were eligible. And that's almost the same number that we randomized. So it's 40% of the patients. So you need to ask the question, okay, if I have 40% of my patients not included in the trial, is that worthwhile the effort? We decided, yes, this is, and looking at the average trial, this is probably what you can achieve. But you need to think, okay, if we approach all eligible patients, how many can I actually include the patients? And the best trial is obviously 100% of the patients enrolled. A good trial is 80%. A fairly good trial is 60%, as we did. But once it gets below 50 or 40% enrolled, you need to ask the question, does that represent my population that I'm studying? So keep these numbers low. You don't want to have patients excluded after you randomize them into the trial. Now, going into the methods, very important. Think about how you defined your population you study. So you need to have a clear definition of the exclusion and inclusion criteria. If you're too large, you're going to fail. If you're too tight, you're going to fail as well. And you need to have a good prescription or precise description of your intervention. And make your measurement, how you measure it, precise. Go down the track that you say, I want to protect the primary outcome. That means I want to describe 100% of my primary outcome to be fulfilled. You don't want to miss out. Then, of course, publish your protocol. If you have a protocol, put it on to BMC, BMJ, or whatever journal you want to publish it in, and register your trial. These are the two main steps to get your trial published. Otherwise, you're going to be screwed. Now, the cons and pros, or more the cons of an RCT. I had performed several RCTs, and finding equipoise is an intervention valid to be applied. We had many arguments. I'm just showing you this trial here. They trialed the parachute trial, which means that they jumped off an airplane with and without parachute and asked the question, what is the survival? And now in this trial, they showed that the survival was with and without parachute was equal. Oh, surprise. And the reason was that the airplane never took off. They jumped off the aircraft while stationary on the tarmac. So you see that if you don't define your primary outcome well enough and have a good understanding how you want to achieve it, you can have a negative trial. Or if the airplanes would have been, 10,000 feet above sea level, they would have shown a very clear different outcome. So that's what it is. So make sure that you have a clear definition of where you're going to. Randomized controlled trials are utterly complicated to run because you have so many layers. You need to educate, you need to educate, you need to talk, you need to make friends. And it is very expensive to run. And don't forget the following, that you have a Hawthorne effect in randomized controlled trials. That means you're telling the clinician, your patient is enrolled in a trial. Make sure that your patient is well. Never mind if the patient gets control or intervention. Your clinician thinks that I want to make sure my patient is really doing well. And by the Hawthorne effect is meaning that the clinician is observed. And when a clinician is observed, they perform better. We just recently or about to publish a trial where we show that the Hawthorne effect is indeed a big problem because we have shown that the control group performed way better than we would have expected. And that's just because the clinicians paid attention, because they had to fill in forms. They had to tell us what they did and how they performed. Another component that came in over the last maybe 10 years is that the big trials and the good trials need now these days to have a statistical analysis plan, which is different to the protocol. So in the statistical analysis plan, you need to mention the statistical methods and the thresholds for positive or negative findings before you lock the data. And you need to say, okay, we decided to use X, Y, and Z method to analyze the data, and then you lock the data and then you analyze. So you are not scrutinized that you change your plan on how you analyze. So you have to define the significant thresholds, and please publish it prior to analysis. Or one simple way to do it is that if you register your trial, and you have to register your randomized controlled trial to a registry, you can upload the statistical analysis plan to this registry and say, look, this is what we aim to do. Because the major journals, they're going to ask you, have you had a statistical analysis plan? Because when I review a big paper, I go for the three pillars. I go and see if they published the protocol. I see and look up the registry, if they have registered the trial. And I look up if they had a statistical analysis plan prior to analysis of their data. Because if you haven't done so, your trial is going to be off the hook with the better trials, better journals. So tips for a good RCT is consult with an expert. Just find someone. And don't forget, WFPICCS is offering lots of expertise advice or mentor. So you can approach, and WFPICCS is in developing a mentor program where you can have a mentor that helps you to guide through a project. And as I said before, protect the primary outcome. And unfortunately, you need money. And don't use complicated trial designs. They are for the big research groups, and they're complicated and whatever. Don't do it. It's too hard. You won't get anywhere. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Andreas. Okay, I can't see any comments or questions that have come through. So we'll move on to the final discussion that or topic we're having that Dr. Chisti is going to present to you tonight, and that's with regards to observational studies. So I'll let you share your screen, Chisti, and take it from here. Just have to unmute.
Okay, yes. Okay.
Okay, we can see it nice and clear.
Okay. So it is now in the presentation mode?
No, you might just need to click your bottom thing. Next one, I think. Next one. Oh, perfect. Now it's perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I am going to speak on observational study, but performing the right and not so right way. So before going to this main presentation, I want to just give you a brief overview about the hierarchy of the evidence. As Professor Andreas already showed that randomized clinical trial should be the best design. And if we see the hierarchy of the evidence, which actually indicates which studies should be given most weight in an evaluation where the same question has been examined using the different types of the study. So from that hierarchy, we can see that randomized clinical trial, which is experimental, should be the top of the list, followed by cohort, case control, the cross-sectional and ecological. And all these pros should fall under observational study. So I will not discuss about randomized clinical trial, which is elegantly described by Professor Andreas. And now I want to tell that although RCT is gold standard of medical research, but if it is not always appropriate, rather doing observational study should be better in some condition. So I will discuss few examples for that, and this is really important. And my senior colleague, Dr. Joyashree, has already pointed out the ethical issues, and there are a lot of studies which were done previously, which were RCTs, but are not done in a right way, that we need to discuss. Rather, those could be done in a simple way, but that should be observational other studies. So as you most of you have already come across to know that RCTs are only possible where there is an intervention, that people are willing to be randomized with their informed consent. Otherwise, we cannot do this. And I can give you a few examples. And one of them is the Tuskegee study. The goal of this study was to observe the natural history of untreated syphilis in Black populations, but the subjects were completely unaware and were instead told by the investigators that they were receiving treatment for bad blood. However, in fact, they didn't receive any treatment at all. And you can see that a doctor draws blood from one of the Tuskegee test subjects. And in that trial, the study population were nearly 400 African Americans with syphilis, where in 1932, those diagnosed with syphilis who were of the appropriate age were recognized, and they received proper treatment of the syphilis. And the researcher decided to, in 1933, and researchers decided to continue the study long term. They recruited control patients who also didn't have syphilis. However, if you see that they also began giving all patients effective medicines, but by 1947, penicillin had become the standard of treatment for syphilis. They were actively preventing 399 men from receiving the same treatments. In 1972, the Tuskegee studies finally ended. By this time, only 74 of the study subjects still alive, and 128 patients had died of syphilis or its complications. And you saw that 19 of their children had acquired congenital syphilis. And that does mean that you can see that although it was a randomized trial from the very beginning, it was not done in an ethical way, that is, it was not done in a right way, and by this time, a lot of consequences have been occurred. As it was the early stage of the researches, so ethics board were not so strong, but nowadays the ethical board is very strong, and this kind of research would never be possible in any part of the world now. And if I give you a second example where you can find that there's a nutritional research on residential school children of Canada. In this experiment, control and treatment groups of malnourished children were denied adequate nutrition and dental care because of the researchers wanted to observe the state of dental caries and gingivitis with malnutrition. And the study population were the Canadian Aboriginal children at 6 residential schools. And the study was done, I think, between 1942 and 1952. And what you can see that nutritional researchers saw malnourished children at Indian residential school as perfect test subjects. And the treatment group received supplements of riboflavin, thiamine, and or ascorbic acid supplements to determine whether this mitigated the problems. In another, the children were given a flour mix containing added thiamine, riboflavin, and niacin and bone meal. And what happened, rather than improving nutrition, the children became more anemic, and likely contributed to more deaths and certainly impacting development. And in these experiments, parents were not informed and nor were consents obtained. And even as children died, the experiments still continued. And that does mean that this kind of research, although this was the randomized clinical trial, but it was not an appropriate study. So now I want to give you some example that was the appropriate study which was done in an observational way, but not doing the randomized trial. And in case of rare and life-threatening disease, randomized clinical trial may not be done in the children. Several other types of study generate data that are at least as effective as RCTs and maybe even more effective in generating evidence. And one of the example is that that study was done in ICDDRB, Dhaka, Bangladesh, that the factor associated with scleroderma in infants with diarrheal disease. This is a age and sex matched case control study. I think that most of you know that the scleroderma is a very life-threatening condition. It previously known as the scleroderma neonatorum, and nowadays it is known as scleroderma, which used to occur in newborn infant. And nowadays it can also occur in severely malnourished children who used to come with severe septic condition. And it used to occur due to the hardening of the subcutaneous tissue due to the derangement of saturated and unsaturated fatty acid ratio, and produces triglyceride crystal and provide almost terror-like hardening of the subcutaneous tissue. And in our center, what we have done an observational this case control study where we treated all of them with not all of them, most of them who actually had the opportunity to arrangement of blood. All of them received the blood transfusion. And what we have found in that study that in that study, it was found that the blood transfusion was associated with the remission of scleroderma and survival benefit. And if you see that children with scleroderma receiving blood transfusion had the 86% survival rate, and those who did not receive those who received blood transfusion, their death rate was 56%. That does mean that if we want to perform a randomized trial now, our ethical board will not allow us to go for the randomized trial, refraining one group of scleroderma children from blood transfusion. That does mean that by not doing a randomized trial, but only doing observational trial with a case control design was better than doing a randomized clinical trial. So nowadays, blood transfusion was the choice of treatment for the children who come with scleroderma. And scleroderma is not also very common. It is a rare condition, but the life-threatening condition. In that case, randomized trial might also not be feasible from the perspective of enrollment of the adequate amount of patients. And here, placebo might not be allowed by the ethical board for the sclerodermatic children. And it is not only from my study, but also from the ancient study. It is also shown that in scleroderma, exchange transfusion and blood transfusion works. But till date, there is no randomized trial to prove this. And there is another cities. So there is another cross-sectional study of Ebola virus disease preparedness among the National Health Service Hospital Trusts in England, where our cities it was not considered because of the fact that it was an urgent health issue, and there is an outbreak where semi-structured telephone interviews and online surveys were used to understand the how the air travel data outside Africa, especially in UK, it can be used to reduce the spread in the UK. And hospitals in England were therefore instructed to prepare for the assessment of early management of suspected cases. Hence, a study which can be used to probe and or disprove assumptions, and their RCT is not always required. So I can give you another example of doing only observational study of protocolized management of diarrheal children with severe malnutrition. It was done in 1996 in Bangladesh, where there was an observational study using protocolized management of severely malnourished children with diarrhea and use historical data for the control. And you can see that it was a study which was done among the severely malnourished children who were hospitalized with diarrhea, severe malnutrition, and other different comorbidities. And the investigator refrained from performing a randomized trial, and they have performed the observational trial, and all the children prospectively received the treatment of protocolized management. That protocolized management means that it was as like as F75, and restriction of fluid, that is the slow rehydration. And they compared with the historical data with 1 year back, and it has been found that they found that there was significant reduction of deaths. And later, there was no randomized trial on that, and WHO adopted this the mild modification as the treatment of the protocolized treatment of the severely malnourished children. So it was a landmark study which was published in Lancet in 1999. That does mean that refraining from gold standard study like RCT, and by only doing a observational study which is more relevant and more ethical, a study which was done, and it is now saving millions of lives in sub-Saharan Africa as well as in Southeast Asia, including Bangladesh. So in summary, I want to emphasize that RCTs, it used to be considered as the gold standard, but it is not always gold standard for medical research, because sometimes RCTs need to refrain some very good treatment from the control group. So RCT should never be done where ethical constraint is there, and where RCT has some potential constraints, observational study is the better, probably the only solution. Thank you all for your patience hearing.
Thanks, Chisti. Thank you so much. I'm just going to thanks so much again, Chisti. I know this has been quite a long 2-hour virtual workshop, and we're conscious that it takes some time and effort for everybody to stay on with us during the presentation. So we're very thankful that you have. We hope that what's been presented today is of help, be it in a small or a large aspect to you for your own purposes, or maybe that within a research group that you work with. We've had attendees, I've just had a look as we've been traveling through, we've had attendees from every continent that's attended today, and which is just wonderful. And our aim has always been to ensure that we can help our colleagues in the lower resource settings with their research. And with that item, as Andreas alluded to earlier, the WFPICCS Research Committee are currently looking at ways to shape our mentorship program a little bit more. We're still in the early stages, but we want to do this so that we can help you, more of you. And so if there's somebody that either yourself or those that you may work with that has an interest in actually being mentored with their project, it could be from early stages or all the way through. It could just be to do with grant writing or a component of it, or the entire aspect. Please do reach out to us via WFPICCS or through one of the chairs, and we can then direct you on, as we're trying to grow that component of the WFPICCS committee. For the moment, I can't see any questions in the chat, but are there any questions? We can open it up to the group and from any of the attendees. If you want to unmute, if anybody has any questions for the chairs. Oh, who's raised a hand? Is that you, Andreas? I've not raised my hand. Oh.
No.
Looks
Sorry,
like I raised
yes.
my hand. Oh,
Sorry, yes.
you.
Chisti, I have to applaud you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Your presentation actually enlightened me and just
No. It's the opposite. It's the opposite. Look, I think that it is always about the context.
Yes.
And what we can achieve within an environment. And yes, the so-called, I don't know how to describe it, the gold standard is the RCT, but but it may be not what is the reality. And you just showed us a very delightful how certain implementation of nutritional plans and, you know, how they can achieve an important outcome. And I think that lower and middle income countries need to raise their voice and say, yes, we acknowledge RCTs, but there's different avenues to actually demonstrate within our own context to improve outcome. And you just shown with your own data that this is achievable and it makes a meaningful impact. And I think that's so important. It is not within the high income country. It is within the low and middle income countries that we say, this is making a difference to us. And please listen to us. And it's like the climate change. You know, I'm listening to the Pacific Asian countries that are living on a very low level of ocean tide growing and up and down. And I don't think that there's a randomized controlled trial to show that climate change will make a difference. It is an observational trial that makes a difference. And so I really appreciate what you just said, that we need to really appreciate what can we do in our environment and showcase basically what we need to do different. And I'm living in Australia, which is a high-income country. I'm living the randomized controlled trial, but I'm truly, truly, truly believing that we need to listen to you guys who are telling us, hold on, we can't do this. It is different. It is a different ballgame. And I really, really appreciate that input.
Thank you. Thank you. And this actually, you and Joyce's talks also enlightened all of us, and hopefully our junior colleagues will be enlightened through both of you and our junior colleagues. I also see that from ICDDRV there are some who actually joined there. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't see any other comments or anything like that. So Jayashree or Andreas or Chisti, is there anything else more that you wish to add, or you happy to close?
Thank you from my part.
Yeah,
This
thank you
is
from my
okay,
part.
but I think this is a great initiative by you and Andreas as well as Jayashree. And I love to continue this in future generation who are coming. And I'm really privileged to have this opportunity. So thank you very much.
Well, I'll close by just saying again.
So
Sorry.
sorry, Donna, can I say that?
Yep.
Jayashree, Chisti, Donna, and I are very open to be contacted in relation to research questions. And if anyone within the audience think that they want to reach out, please reach out, because after research without boundaries.
Exactly.
We have one question now that's coming in from Sai. Is asking, is there any AI related studies? Which study design would you choose or suggest to use as appropriate for that? Who wants to? I think you're muted. Is it?
No, I'm good. And taking offside. I'm not an AI person. Interesting question. I don't know, to be honest. I would be cautioned by asking the right question and the right direction. But I think there's merit in AI direction, which been or should be reflected in expertise background. But I'm sure that the future will be directed by AI as well. So I want, you know,
Go another way.
deflect the question. But to be honest, I don't know. And I would be cautious yet because there's no experience and no reflection on it. But I think it's a valid question. It's an important question.
Yeah, just Donna, I just want to. I quite agree with Dr. Andreas that we are just conducting a study with the collaboration with the Brown University, the role of artificial intelligence in identifying the deteriorating signs of sepsis in ICU. And we are using the biosensor patch into the front of the chest, which relentlessly identify the heart rate variability, temperature, and respiratory rate, and also ECG. And what we have found that it can identify deteriorating signs some hours, around 2 hours earlier than our ICU clinicians. So it is good what Dr. Andres said, but in my last 2 years experience collaborating with Brown University with artificial intelligence, what I have found that we should not rely on that. It is just can help the clinicians to have the rapid diagnosis of the deteriorating sign. Sometimes clinicians might, if rely totally on it, they might miss a lot of things because if it is the life of the people, it's the lives of the people, it is the game of life and death. So if a robot cannot give you the total answer, it can just help. So my answer is that although I am doing research in artificial intelligence, I am still very cautious. It can take only the assistance, but not the decider. Thank you.
Jesse, there was a trial that used to, I can't remember the number of professors to assess the cardiac failure of patients. And they assessed them against the probability of not monkeys, but in the end it was monkeys. And the probability of professors against monkeys was equal, almost 50-50. And I'm just cautious about AI to ask the question, do we exchange the intuition of clinicians versus, you know, machine or whatever it is? And I'm not putting in an opinion. I don't know. And that's where artificial intelligence need to be tested against human intelligence. You know, I always thought my ultimate randomized trial is a machine learning trial in ARDS versus human instituted management of ARDS, and see what the outcome is. I think we should apply the same principle to AI before we gave or are giving the credential to AI. I don't think we should lose the principle of, do you make it different, yes and no, before we accept it.
Exactly.
And that's my view. However, I use AI to edit some of my language, some of my editing, and I love it because it gives me so much more of different views of how things could verbalize. So I think we need to embrace it, learn it, and go with it, and not oppose it.
Exactly. Take the assistance, not to be dependent.
Yeah.
I agree entirely, because it's helped me immensely in the last 6 months. I've started to use it now, and it's helped me actually get grants because it writes it better than I do. So it's I have actually been successful. So you use it. Yeah. Okay, well, I'll close this off now. Again, just to thank you, huge thank you to Chisti, Jayashri and Andreas for your time and the efforts that you've placed into the workshop. It's greatly appreciated. And for everybody that's online, this workshop's going to be repeated in person on June 2nd, I think it is, in Cancun, if we can get enough numbers. It's actually a free registration. We've made it free so that we can, get more people, and we can open the discussion up a little bit more if you've got some specifics that you want to ask questions to. But, share that information out with your colleagues if they'd like to attend as well. Otherwise, thanks everyone for attending today, and we hope you have a good rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to Andreas, and wish you have a very rapid recovery.
Speedy recovery.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
So we hope to
Bye.
see you in Cancun.
Yeah. Bye. Just hope to manage everything and let you know.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.